Oh man, Neeta, I'm so excited to have this conversation with you. I know we were talking a little bit right before I hit record about sort of the unspoken stuff that solopreneurs and entrepreneurs go through. I didn't know about it when I started my business, sort of the emotional roller coaster I was going to be on. So I just feel like you've gone through a lot. You speak about this stuff a lot, and you have a lot of perspective that might be very helpful to a group of people who are so focused on numbers and achieving and performanceism and whatever we're chasing to get us to where we are. So I'm just excited to have a conversation with you. Thanks for taking time out of your day today.
Oh my gosh, Graham, I'm so excited. Equally excited to be here and jam it out with you.
Yeah, man. So I covered a lot of your incredible stuff in the intro, but can you just walk us through, you've gone through a lot. You've had some dark moments in your life, and I know I don't want to start there, but I want to start there because I really think your story will lend a lot of credibility and context for all the stuff you're talking about in your books and what we can talk about today. So maybe walk us through a little bit of your story and how it led to what you're doing now.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think with a lot of entrepreneurship, we go into our dark moments and we have many of those sucky moments. It is a hard road, and it often prepares you for some of those big highs, the high highs and the low lows. And I think for me, it started as a young girl. I was literally probably, preparing for a lot of my sucky moments that I would experience very early on in life. At 10 years old, I was a caretaker to my mom. My mom and my dad, they were immigrants, and I grew up in Chicago. And so I was oldest of three. And my mom was diagnosed with breast cancer. So between the ages of 10 and 16, I definitely was in that caretaking mode. I was the oldest girl of the house, which meant I would support my dad in whatever, chores, things like that. And she was in and out of the hospital for 6 years. I mean, until her cancer got really bad and it spread to, unfortunately, her lungs and her brain. And so, I'm 14 years old, teenager, freshman in like high school. All my friends are going out to the mall and because they did that stuff. And I'm literally after school tending to my mom in the hospital. And then that's just kind of the life that I knew. And so, the last year of her life, she spent in the ICU. So I knew what ventilators, were before it was, COVID and a thing, honestly. And that was, it was obviously very traumatic. And so my mom died when I was 16. I definitely took up a lot of that responsibility. Got my first job at 15 years old, I think my first 2 jobs at 15 to support my family. And then a year after my mom died, my brother suddenly died of an asthma attack. And he was a year and a half younger than me. Yeah, and that was just, beyond belief, just so devastating. It was just awful, and all of the emotions. We were just, we were paralyzed because we had just lost our mom a year before that. And so my dad went into this deep depression, and I couldn't go away to college. And so I stayed back to support my family. And unfortunately, he died on my youngest brother's birthday. So just talk about trauma. And then 2 years after that, when we thought, okay, finally, like the cloud, is this going to end? Are the blows going to just stop? My dad was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. So in a span of 4 years before I was 20 years old, I was 19, I would lose my mom, my brother, and my dad. And I literally had this chip on my shoulder, and you think, well, any entrepreneur that wants to succeed has this chip on their shoulder. I even talk about it in one of my books, my newest book, That Sucked, Now What, on why is it that many of us have a chip on our shoulder. I know that I needed something to prove. I had something to prove. I did not want society, people around me, our family members to pity my brother and I. And so that was really the initial start of many of the highs and lows of what I would get into. Later on in my 20s, I would become a cosmetic dentist. I went to dental school because, as a Filipino Indian girl, the career choices are doctor, dentist, lawyer, engineer, and I wanted to make the ghosts of my parents proud. So I did that. I succeeded. I pushed. And that was my mantra, was to constantly, it was achieve mode. And so I did that. And I charted my first 7 figures before I was 30. I was one of the very first, females in my class for sure, but also very few kids in my dental class that would go on and buy a practice almost straight out of dental school. And I thought, I made it. I'm like, all right, nobody can feel bad for me now. I've done it. And that was a really tough road, because it came with all sorts of insecurities, and many insecurities that I tried to swallow because I wanted to make myself so busy. Coping mechanism 101. And I wanted to really bury a lot of the dark, heavy feelings that I didn't know how to grapple with. Mental health with entrepreneurs is such a sensitive topic, obviously, and now it's coming out into the foray, and, it's what I've devoted much of my, now work and my life's work to. But back then, it's the mantra was keep going, keep going, keep going. And, you see the memes, the motivational memes of the guy like running so fast in between mountains and, very masculine. And I wanted to be that person. I'm like, okay. And, listening to like Tony Robbins in my dental, in my car, and just, on my way to the dental office, until I literally hit rock bottom. I bursted. I had a personal challenge in my life that I thought I could avoid and I could bury, because I would keep busying myself in those numbers, busying myself in comparing my accolades, my success, and leading with that. Oh, I wasn't even 30. I was 28, had my first million, etc. Had doctors working under me, had a beautiful practice that I now owned, but I didn't really believe that I was worthy of having my name on that door, because there were still some of those things coming up. So it wasn't until it was December 31st where I would fully hit rock bottom, because I had to face my deepest, darkest fear, which was confronting my friends and family, and even leaving and admitting too that I was in an abusive relationship, an abusive marriage. And things happened really, really fast. And, to spare all the details, but the crux of it was I had to say 3 pivotal words. And that was, I need help. And I need help was literally the doorway to allowing my friends and family in, telling my brother that I was keeping this really deep, dark secret. But if anybody has ever noticed or witnessed or been friends with somebody who's dating someone that they don't like, or has felt that, I don't know about those two, well, my family already kind of knew. I was the only one that was really in denial. And I needed to go and take those brave and courageous steps to step out. But it wasn't going to happen until I hit rock bottom. And I was so afraid to tell the biggest fear I had was to tell my office, to tell the people that was working under me that, oh my goodness, I'm having this very private affair that is now just being public, because I had to leave my house haphazardly. I had to file for a restraining order. I had to do adult things that I didn't want to be confronted with, because I wanted to busy myself in all of those accolades. And that would reveal, the next 5 years of my life, and just a huge, huge awakening on so many levels to arrive at, speaking to you today.
Wow. You had to grow up so fast. I mean, you dealt with any one of those things before the age of 19 would be a lot for any one adult to deal with. But as a non-fully adult yet, you were dealing with 3 times the amount of loss that anyone could probably even withstand. And you're the oldest, you said, of your siblings. I'm the firstborn. Do you feel like I feel like as the firstborn, you're kind of set up to be that performer, achiever already. And then, gosh, the deck was stacked against you with wanting to take care of your siblings and then prove that to your parents that, you're going to, I don't know, I'm putting words in your mouth, take up the mantle of the legacy of your family. Did you feel all of that combined together?
Oh my goodness. I mean, I think it comes, as a fellow eldest, I think we can celebrate that it's tough, and there's so much pressure, and there's, your parents don't really know what they're doing when they're raising you because you're the firstborn. So
you're the guinea pig.
Yeah, we're the guinea pig. And there is a lot of resilience that comes with that role. And I think that especially with the amount of loss and the amount of tragedy, the amount of adversity, the amount of setbacks, I felt like, life was just given punches one after the other. I mean, there were times, and I didn't realize it back then because you don't necessarily realize when you are in your darkest moments until you see contrast on the other side, until you maybe then fall in love again, or you get a win in your business, or you get, that client, stays on again. You're like, oh, finally, yes, this is progress. And for me, I didn't realize like how low I was until I could experience the other side of that. Like until I got married for the first time, and I'm like, oh wow, this is what it feels like to have an amazing wedding and to have people just around you and celebrating joy and periods of joy where there's not like traumatic responses because you're afraid that somebody else is going to die or you're going to get another phone call. And so my nervous system was so dysregulated, but I was so attuned to chaos growing up. I was so attuned to dysfunction because there was so much happening. And I had to keep the peace because, well, I needed to take care of my dad who was in depression. I needed to also take care of my brother as well because he was 5 years younger than me. So there were, as you're just sharing, there were stacks against me in that way. But I think that the amount of life that I experienced definitely prepared me for that full rock bottom, full circle moment. Because many times, I think with the amount of interviews that I've had with entrepreneurs and my own research that I've done, and there was I interviewed about 500 leaders before my very first book came out because I was just so curious, and I was a science geek in college. I was a chemistry major, and and psych was in human dynamics was just a big part of my life because I grew up having to see and be aware of how my parents were in their darkest times of their life, and to see them transition was huge. And so it informed me and my curiosity around, well, how do, successful people, right? This is a great podcast to talk about, the accolades and the achievements, but what do they deem as, these characteristic traits that keep them moving through adverse moments? Because I'm like, I can't be the only one going through such pain and just a dark time. And it was resiliency. It was resilience, it was grit, and it was the ability to hold on, grit when things are tough, not to let go. And back then I was told, Neeta, you're resilient, you're strong. But there wasn't space to actually say, but it's okay to not be okay.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the full circle. I had to say that to myself when I was in rock bottom of a love relationship, because many successful entrepreneurs, we neglect many times the romantic relationships or our interpersonal relationships with friends because we're so focused on the medallion. We're so focused on that medal.
Yeah.
And so much so that we're willing to risk everything else because of the numbers, because the next, hurdle. And then you see some of these, these memes and end of year discussions that people have, that why is it they, didn't live the best life, or, some of these regrets of the dying was that they didn't live full out. They were so focused on some of the things that didn't go well that Now their regret is not being able to spend time with, their loved ones, or to even formulate some of those relationships in the way that they could have.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about resilience and grit. It's interesting because I feel like, to your point, as a first child, I had to grow up quickly. I remember my mom, and Mom, if you're listening to this, we've talked about this. It's okay. I can talk about this on the podcast. I remember being 5 years old and my little brother being born, because we were 5 years apart also. And my mom saying, Graham, I'm so glad that you're such a big boy. Now you can help me basically take care of your little brother. And she basically kind of passed the mantle on and said, you're grown up now. I'm now going to mother, your little brother, and I need your help, and you can kind of help me co-parent. And she was, at the time, I felt like, oh, this is great. Yeah, Mommy's like proud of me that I'm a big boy, that I can take care of my little brother. But it's funny because that's almost the moment that I kind of stopped, being mothered in a way. And it was like, I kind of carried that mantle from age 5, and I'm having to unpack this in counseling and realize, wow, that's the strength of that for me is that I'll go out and I'll be the first one in the family or in my group to go try something or do something. My wife and I moved 1,000 miles away during the Great Recession to help some friends start a church, and I ended up starting a business after I lost my job, and we're on food stamps. And I'm just like, well, this is scary, but we'll figure it out. And I'm realizing not everybody would go do that. And so that's a strength. But then the negative is that I'm always in I have to do this. I can do this. And if I can't do it, something's wrong with me, or I should figure it out privately. To your point, it's hard to say I need help. I put so much pressure on myself. So I'm here's my vulnerable Graham counseling moment, but I see resilience as such a great, wonderful thing. But my roundabout question is, how do you know when it's not just resilience or grit that you need? It's actually it can be harmful because you're just stubborn and you're just pushing through and you're not asking for the help, or like you said, you're chasing the prize and you get it, but you lose everything else in the process. Does that make sense?
Oh, yes. Well, I love that you're speaking to that, because I think that we've normalized the push and the struggle and it's gotta be hard and gritty all the time. And while that was, some of the findings in my first book, I wanted to revisit the definition that I think, is so appropriate for where we are in the stage and the season of life that we are in entrepreneurship and even in the world. Post-pandemic, we have a mental health crisis. Well, it's probably because we haven't been okay with our emotions. We haven't been okay. We've been push, and we've normalized it. Society has deemed that as acceptable to push. Yet we haven't had the space, and we don't even teach tools to how to actually be there for our loved ones or our friends going through a tough time. I mean, the biggest, thing for me growing up without parents or having the big adversities that I had as a teenager, I did not want to be that teenager or that young person going to college, going to networking, the school dance or, any of those events as a teen and being the odd one out, the one that, oh yeah, she's the one that has the deaths, or young people didn't know how to even support, how to be there. And because we've normalized let's get up as fast as you can, let's go again, we don't even know how to be there for our friends that actually need our support, not even for ourselves, let alone our friends. And so what I define resiliency now, and even in my book, my newest book, That Sucked, Now What? How to Embrace the Joy in Chaos and Find Magic in the Mess, is if we take the Latin, root of resilience, it's called resiliere, and resiliere means to bounce back. Well, if I were to take something that's really strong, imagine, I don't know, granite or a brick, and I hold it in my hand and I let that go, piece of granite, or maybe it's a glass. Well, we could argue and say, well, that's really tough. That's strong. Is it going to break? Well, if I let that go, it's probably going to shatter, versus if I were to take a basketball or one of those balls that we get for our kids. I have two kids, one in 3, one in 4. And if we hold it, it has a little bit of agility. It has a little bit of bounce back. It has a little bit of a give. It has some flexibility. It's still tough, but it's also soft. And when we let it go, it tends to bounce, sometimes lower, sometimes higher. And that's how I define resiliency now. And in my book is that we have to allow space for, yes, it is about mental toughness, but at the same time, it's also about our softness. It's about our compassion for ourselves. It's about the ability to take the moment to sit in the suck and to see, all right, what do I actually need right now? And that's really, where I've arrived in this season of being able to even support entrepreneurs and their mental health. And in this dialogue, in this conversation of, I'm going to give you permission to actually sit in the suck. And most of the time, people are so afraid, especially entrepreneurs, that if they are sitting in what didn't go well or beating themselves up, or they go into, the far left or far right, far extremes, and they say, they get into the self-critic or self-sabotage, or I'm never going to do this again, or gosh, who am I to do this? But no, if we're actually allowing ourselves that space, and I have so many different tools and so many different ways to actually process and embrace the suck. But literally all you need is sometimes maybe 30 seconds, 60 seconds. If you're in a stressful moment, there are ways where we can actually, take the weekend to process. But at the very least, allow yourself to sit in that discomfort of that anxiety, of the overwhelm, of the defeat, of the loss, of the grief, of the rejection, the abandonment, the guilt. If we can allow ourselves to sit there instead of bury, move forward, jump forward, leap again, then those pain signals are still signals of discomfort of, all right, what do I need to gain or lean in to this? And instead of, many times we're leaning in so far to be the best versions of ourselves, now I'm even telling people to lie down, take a breather, give yourself that opportunity. Because aren't we so much better when we've given ourselves, that space as entrepreneurs to contemplate and to think and to reflect? We're so in the mad chaos because as entrepreneurs, we've been through a lot of stuff. And so we are primed and wired to take on a lot. And that is part of our character. It's great. Yet, can we also, if you're one to just keep, going 160 miles an hour, can you actually slow down your brakes, pump your brakes, and actually say, you know what? How did that make me really feel? Did I actually lose my shit again on somebody else? Did I emotionally just vomit on someone else where they didn't deserve that? Because I can't take the time to sit in my own discomfort that I have to project it outward.
Hey friend, we'll get back to the episode in just a moment, but I wanted to give you a gift for hanging out with me today. I want to give you my 30-day online income jumpstart guide. This is a 4-week checklist, bullet points to go from zero audience, zero customers, maybe even zero idea of what your business should be, to putting money in your pocket 30 days from now. It won't be $1 million in 30 days, but it will be money in your pocket. You will have figured out your idea. You will have tested your idea. You will have launched your idea and taken massive action towards building a business and a life that you love. If you already know your business idea, but you've been sitting around and you haven't taken action on it, then you need this guide because it'll walk you through a 4-week plan to go from where you are to putting money in your pocket in 30 days. And if you've never figured out what your business idea is and you have no followers online and no audience, it's okay. This will help you start at zero. I promise you. It's a PDF. It's fast. It's easy to read. It's not an ebook. You don't have to spend a lot of time on this. It's more about taking action and doing the right things in the right order. And it's free as my gift to you. So just go to grahamcochran.com/jumpstart to get your 30-day online income jumpstart guide. It's grahamcochran.com/jumpstart. Now back to the episode. Yeah, that's so good. 2 things that have helped me, and I'm curious what some of these tools are that you found to be most successful for your clients and yourself. You mentioned that one is space, and not, packing your days or your weeks so full. I was on a call with Rich Litvin, and he said this, something that just blew my mind. It's so obvious, but space is where miracles happen, and creating space to think. That's both positive, like where you can imagine the cool things you could create. For me as a content creator, ideas, concepts, frameworks, and same thing for you, as an author and speaker. But then also what you're talking about, the space to think about the narratives in our heads, both good or bad, something that just happened, space to process. So creating the space, and then journaling, which I used to make fun of forever because I have bad handwriting. It slows me down, and I just didn't see the point. And I've had to eat my words in the last 12 months as I've been very intentionally journaling every day. And some days there's not much to journal. Some days there's a lot of good things. Sometimes there's a lot of processing of negative things. But for me, I found creating space to think and then journal, even if it's like, hey, I'm still struggling with, my point earlier, like last week I was processing, I am operating under the assumption that the stakes are so high for everything I'm dealing with. The stakes are, exponentially higher than they should be. And so it's making me like anxious or like, crabby or in a bad mood around something that's not, it's got stakes, but they're not that high grams. So why are you putting so much emphasis and weight on X, Y, and Z? It could be switching CPAs. And it's like, I have to find the right accountant because I've done this 4 times. And if I don't want to have to switch again, and I don't want to have to, I want to get the right tax strategy. So it's like, okay, it's important, but it's just a CPA. It's just a decision. The stakes aren't that high. So I've been processing that as an example. So space, journaling, what for you has worked, and for your clients, for yourself, some basic tools that people can use to take inventory of their mental health, or maybe process a heavy thing, or maybe a small thing that's just nagging them, or low level anxiety.
Yeah. Well, so in that Suck Now What, after each of the chapters, I actually have a reflection corner. And the biggest thing, and it's inspired by my POC. It's a POC check-in, and POC actually stands for personal observation check-in. And this is what you can do. And I've told students, clients, even boardroom talks, to actually, if you have 30 minutes at the end of each day, and it's great. It's kind of like, your end of day release. And it could be an end of day ritual that you have, because rituals versus rituals you can make as sacred. And this could be your sacred kind of coming inward practice. Some people like to do it once a week. I like to, if you can, have that space. And if you don't have littles like I am, and in depending on the season and stage of life, it's great to have this ritual, because you can actually just ask yourself. I mean, there's 2 questions. What went well today? What are we celebrating? And people have a really hard time with this, because it's like, oh, it's got to be something big that I'm celebrating.
Yeah.
No, you could be celebrating the fact that you failed at something, the fact that there was a setback, and the fact that something didn't go well. We don't celebrate our failures enough. And I know that in entrepreneurship, many times, and when I used to advise, startup founders who are backed by VCs, they wanted to fail, because that was another data point. That was another data point to make sure and get their product crystal clear. Well, many times as entrepreneurs, those failures can be the next data point to what we want to add on or modify or delete or shift or change in ourselves. But instead of those metrics, what went well in our life? What didn't go so well? Did we have a conversation that could have been better, right? And this is just, how am I actually feeling? Was I spending time with people that were energizing with me today, or depleting? And how was I after the fact? And so, and there's, probably a list of 5 to 10 questions that I typically have, but it can be as easy as, how are you feeling today? And on a scale of 1 to 10, if, and there are people who struggle with their mental health, they struggle with even admitting that something is going on. And so then they bury. And so this can be very uncomfortable for some, because they don't want to go there. But I invite you to go there and see how long you could probably sit in that. I mean, our tears are good indicators of oxytocin, and it releases cortisol, and cortisol is that stress hormone. So if we are fighting back tears, I'd probably want to challenge you on that. And anytime anybody's had, a big cry, they've always shared like, gosh, I feel so much better afterwards.
Feels good. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, in the science benefits are there because it is releasing cortisol. We're literally releasing the cortisol. And I think we're not allowing ourselves that because it's not normalized to sit in that suck. And that is part of it. It's to embrace the suck, to sit in the suck, whether it's 30, 60, 90 seconds, sometimes 5 minutes, sometimes 10 minutes, sometimes a day. But then also, what is it that you are leaning in from that moment, and how can we actually transform that sucky moment into something else? And this could look like a ritual like you provided, which is, journaling is great. One of the things that I really love for extroverts is to be able to articulate how are you feeling out loud. Because many times we're often ruminating in our thoughts and we're thinking kind of the worst things like, oh gosh, I can't believe that just happened, or why did I do that? Or it's in our head. But then when we say, I am actually feeling stressed out, or I'm feeling overwhelmed, or I'm feeling jealous that somebody else I'm working just as hard and theirs just took off even faster. To even say that allows us to regulate and to just let it out. It's kind of like that pressure cooker, or when you have the pressure valve, and we're just releasing the pressure off just by sometimes articulating it. So that's where
that's
I would
powerful.
start.
I mean, the whole idea of talking to yourself versus listening to yourself. And I have the constant inner critic, and I overthink, and things swell in my mind. But when I say them out loud, so I'll process verbally with my wife, let's say at the end of the day, or if I write it out and I see it, wow, I'm feeling X, or to your point, I'm jealous of so-and-so. Like when you just articulate it, and this might not be for everybody, but I have such that older brother, do the right thing mentality that I don't even want to say like those feelings. I would never even want to admit that I am, let's say, jealous of somebody, or like, because it seems wrong. And it's so implicit, so I don't even allow myself to say those things. But when you do, that is so much of a release, to your point of, oh yeah, that is what I'm feeling. And it is just a data point. It's neither good nor bad. And it's not this big monster in my head. So I think it does clarify and reduce the pressure when you say it. So talk to yourself. Don't listen to yourself. It's interesting. Your questions, I think, were so helpful. What worked today, or what went well, what didn't. My wife and I do that every January. Like we look back at the year, and we have like a at-home date night, right? We'll get a glass of wine and we'll just say, okay. And this is when my kids were your kids' his age. There was a longer list of what didn't go well than we did go well, because we just were like so stressed, and you don't know what you're doing. And the kids, they're wonderful, but they just demand so much attention and energy, and they don't give you a whole lot of like love back in the way like, you're doing a great job, Mom. You're just so killing it. I appreciate all that you're doing for me. But we would have that list of, and we'd always start with what went well for us, because we knew we wanted to jump to what didn't go well. So we would force ourselves to, you know what, the kids are healthy, they're alive. Chloe made friends. She's adapting to pre-K or whatever it would be. And then we took that trip. We saw your brother. We had some good family time. We did whatever. And it's just acknowledging it. And the same thing, what didn't work well was helpful for us. That's how we continued to shape our marriage. The way we raised our kids was saying, okay, well, last year, this didn't work so well. And has no bearing on us and our value as parents. It's just a data point of, what, we would like to have more date nights, because what didn't work well was date night. And I remember one year specifically saying, I know this has nothing to do with entrepreneurship, but just the application. One year we said, date night's not working. So what do we have to do to have a regular date night? Can we find one babysitter that we can just get on retainer and say, we will pay you every week. We'll pick a night of the week that's convenient for you. If you don't want to give up your weekends, we'll do Tuesday date night. That's fine. Just when can you come every week? And we don't have to hope you're available. We'll pay you. And that changed everything, just by admitting, that didn't work well last year. And so I love that you're saying do that every day, even for 30 minutes, I call that the landing the plane time of day. Like I can't just go from an email or even a powerful interview like this with you and just leave. I need to like stop for a second as an introvert to like collect my thoughts before I leave the office and go back in the home, even if that's just leaving the home office and stepping across the threshold to the living room. Like I need to have that moment, right?
Oh, totally. I mean, every single morsel, it's so important for us to have whatever works well, for us. And I think for a while, for me, it was journaling for a very long time. And since having my second daughter, and of course we are in the thickness of it, yep. I've had to learn how to externally process, because I was sometimes holding one of my kids in my hand, the other one, in a carrier on my back. And I'm like, all right, what is not going well for me right now? Yep. This is my journal time. And out of that, I shared it on one of the calls that I had with a community that I was leading at the time. And I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so brilliant, because it actually, it encourages introverts to get out of their shell, because many times we ruminate up here either way. And then also for extroverts to sometimes, externally process. And that was the most cathartic way. In fact, I actually wrote my book that way.
Wow.
I wrote this last book that way, because when we had sold this particular book, That Suck Now What, to the publisher, my daughter was 2 days old. She was in the hospital. We, were just healing, and she'd just been born. And 2 months later, I took the 2 months off. But then I started with my team and I said, all right, ask me these questions, but I want you to come up with, to pull this out of me and pull this book out of me. And it was such a healing process, because I was able to nurse her. I was able to, walk. And many times when we are kind of up and walking and moving our bodies, we're also embodying the insights that we have, and which is why I think even in terms of our mental health, when we are going through a sucky moment, one of the ways to embrace the suck, when we transform the suck, is to get up, to move, whatever it looks like for you. But sometimes we need that fresh air. Sometimes it is just a processing walk, to call a friend or somebody, or, your loved one, and say, I need to, say this out loud. Or to even, I've used this, and I don't know if you've done this, Graham, but to even record a voice note to yourself, so that, you're starting to orate what, sometimes we have these deep, dark thoughts, and it's nice to do it in that way.
I think that's so good. Movement always unlocks stuff in my brain. I go for like 6 mile walks, like 3 times a week out here on the river downtown. And then it's funny, voice memos. If I go to a conference or a part of something where you're ingesting so much information, and this isn't even processing bad things, but just even processing information and data. I find that like I'll go back into my hotel room and just verbally process what my insights were. So-and-so, like Neeta said this in a talk, and like she had this analogy or this story, and I'm just sort of verbaling, catching what's in the moment, what's coming up for me, what's stuck, because you lose so much of it. And then you can go back and pull it out or transcribe it. But there's something about speaking it. I love that. And motion. My wife was telling me she saw a guy when she was on a walk just last week who had a buddy with him, and it's like he was walking. It's almost like he was doing what you're doing with the book. Like he was like, ask me questions, and he was holding up the phone and recording the answers to it. And so she was like, that's just so funny, but it's probably how he gets the stuff out of his mind. But I love that. I want to get to this real quick. I know we're short on time, but in the book you talk about something called the bounce factor, and you alluded to it earlier about, being able to bounce back is different than being something that's so hard, so rigid that when you're up against pressure, things crack or break. Can you just briefly explain what the process is in the bounce factor, so people have something to kind of, maybe a framework to remember?
Oh, absolutely. And, this is what I kind of share. This is like the pivotal portion of the book. It's part 2 of the book where, you've had your magical moment that sucked. You probably don't think it's so magical. You probably still think it's a big sucky moment. And many times for people who are, on the path to either build their resiliency, maybe they've gone through a couple of hurdles, business woes, things aren't going well, it's still not going well. Well, here's kind of a way to unpack that. And it is to recognize and strengthen your bounce factor. And most of the time, when we are looking at what didn't work in the past, whether it's looking at our upbringing, whether it's looking at how we played a role. And I loved where you started, taking ownership. You're like, I was the eldest, and it was, kind of in my trajectory to take on the reins. And that's literally what I did. Most people don't even have that self-awareness to unpack their upbringing. So the first part of this is to look at, and it's okay if you don't want to look at your upbringing, but maybe just some of the patterns that have brought you to where you are in your business today. So the first part is, kind of looking and peeking underneath the hood of, well, what were you told around, leadership or entrepreneurship as a kid, or what has motivated you, right?
Yeah.
And even about money in the past, or success or accolades or achievement. So this is all under the umbrella of really looking into either your past of what didn't work. And, this is some of the things that I used to advise even startup founders to look at some of the past failures and see what were some of those patterns. It could also go back into maybe you were 9 years old and you started that first lemonade stand, or, I remember selling clothes out of my closet, at 12 years old. That was like the first thing that I did. I wrote about it in my book. And so you learn from that, but that also, me selling my clothes from my closet, I didn't become the personal shopper, but it also gave me confidence. And that's a first story that I can remember vividly around confidence, that I could actually make money out of the things that I had in my closet.
Yeah.
And so upbringing is really important to see, how were the boys in your family treated? How are the women in your family treated? Did that give you a chip on your shoulder about what women can be doing, what men can be doing, maybe some of your adverse moments? So unpacking all of that and making peace with it, making peace what didn't go well and what actually did and what contributed to where you are today, and own it fully. And so that's the first piece. The second piece is looking at your current environment. And I love this so much because entrepreneurs really love this, because they're like, all right, bring on the fun and the good stress. This is where if you are in a current environment where maybe you have friends that have come along the way, maybe you don't. Maybe you're starting the solo journey, you've left corporate, you're doing this on your own, and it is lonely AF. And I remember, I couldn't resonate with my friends who were still associates as dentists, because I had the responsibility of taking care of and paying payroll for all these people that I had, making sure patients were coming in the door. This is my first, career. And that was a lot of pressure. I felt lonely a lot. And the only colleagues that I had that I knew that were doing the things that they were 30 years senior to me. They were my parents' age. Yeah. And I felt like it wasn't really the right connection or the right fit. I just honestly felt a lot of times lost. But to step out of that and actually invite good stress. So to say yes to difficult conversations. I mean, we do this on a, physical standpoint by stressing our body by going to, weightlift and going to the gym and doing our cold plunges and, meditating. And this is good stress because it actually changes the DNA. It changes our cells. It primes our neurons to actually do more, right? But when we are also allowing ourselves to sit in the discomfort of that feeling, also good stress. When we're allowing ourselves to actually call that person, probably an interpersonal relationship or a friendship or a love relationship, and actually tell them how we feel, that is also stretching us. Yeah. And so that brings me to the third pillar, which is your emotional capacity, and really allowing ourselves to feel the duality of both. We can be so excited as entrepreneurs, but we can also be reserved. We can also be very confident, but in some circles, we can be quite the opposite, can be insecure. And so to actually embrace that this is not just, all shades of, gray or sorry, black and white, but there actually can be varying shades of gray. And that can be magical, where we can feel the opposite and the paradox of our emotions because we're human. And then finally, it's that radical self-awareness, our RSA. And our RSA, I think as entrepreneurs, especially when we are starting out, it is very hard because it's so easy to look and see what other X person's doing or Y person's doing or a competitor's doing, or the person that maybe started 6 months ahead of you, a year ahead of you, 2 years ahead of you. And you're like, man, I'm so behind in the game. I wish I could have started this earlier. Why didn't I do it that way or this way? And we look outward. And social scientists really, they talk about two different and talk about a locus of control, which is the external locus of control, which majority of us humans, we want that validation from other people.
Sure.
But as an entrepreneur, we have to really lean into that internal locus, to really trust our instincts, to really trust our North Star, whatever that, however it shows up for us, but to lean into that, yeah, we're going to make some mistakes, but we're going to also tune in and practice building the muscle of RSA, of radical self-awareness, to be able to say, you know what, that's great that it worked for them, but I'm actually okay where I'm at right now. I'm going to enjoy the journey. And I know what I'm creating is so incredible and it's so impactful, but it's just going to take the time that it takes. And I'm here for the ride. And all of that comprises your bounce factor.
That was a lot, and we could unpack all of that, which is in the book. I love that last part, though. I think, running your own race, it's so hard these days, so important. I know I've benefited so much in a way of having my head down and just saying, this is what I'm created to do, and this is what to your point, I'm intuitively feeling makes sense, and it never helps me to look at what other people are doing. I tell the story that I've unsubscribed from business partners' newsletters because I would be jealous of my own friends and business partners and other things they're doing. I'm like, I can't even look at what you're doing, bro. So I was like, I'll unsubscribe and not tell you that I'm no longer on your email list for a season because I know my insecurities. And so anyway, know yourself. I love that. I have so many other things I want to ask you. I'll just have to have you back on another time. But to wrap up the episode of Bring It Home, there's a segment we do called the Golden Rule segment. And it's real simple. You've got two beautiful kids. You're teaching them a lot and going to teach them a lot. But they're going to forget a lot. And if they happen to forget everything you ever taught them, you and your husband ever taught them, except for one piece of advice or one piece of wisdom that they would carry it with them for the rest of their lives, much like a golden rule, what would you want that to be for them?
Oh, be brave to suck at something new every single day, because that will unlock the greatest opportunity for your growth, for expansion, and even for your healing.
That's beautiful. I love that. I love that. And that tees up so well. Check out her podcast, The Brave Table. Perfect segue. Check out the Brave Table podcast and the book That Sucked and Now What. Neeta, this has been amazing. Thanks for having the conversation and taking time out of your day. And your hat looks great, by the way, too. Thanks for that if you're watching on video.
I'll have to get you a hat that fits your head.
Yeah. This has been wonderful. I appreciate you sharing so much. And I know your stuff is so valuable to everyone that's listening. And wishing you all the success in your career and your family.
Thank you so much, Graham. It was such an honor to be here and pour into your community today.
Well, I hope you enjoyed that episode of the show. It wasn't Dr. Neeta Bhushan incredible? I loved her conversation. I loved her transparency. And she's brilliant. So if you want to dive in deeper with her material, check out the Brave Table podcast. Pick up her latest book, That Sucked, Now What. We'll link to all those things in the show notes below the YouTube video here and in the description as well on the podcast. Thanks for tuning in. Hope you're having an amazing week, and we'll see you on another episode real soon.